Welcome to the Bike Life podcast by Warmshowers Foundation, where we will be sharing knowledge, experience, tools, and stories of touring cyclists and hosts from around the world. I'm Tara Lee, the woman behind the scenes at Warmshowers Foundation, the leading platform for cyclists looking for hosts and to connect with a passionate international community. Find out more by visiting us at Warmshowers.org. Now, on to the show.
Hello, and welcome to Bike Life. This is Jerry Kopak, and if you don't recognize my voice yet, I'm the new host, taking over for Toverly. But don't worry, she's still around as our executive director, but she's focusing her time on making your experiences as hosts and travelers even better. A little bit about me. I've been the finance guy for Warm Showers for about 5 years. And when I'm not building spreadsheets, you'll find me hosting bike travelers at my home in Breckenridge, Colorado, or maybe on my own bike tour someplace else in the world. Today, I'm talking with Jeff Jinnett, who at the age of 61 set out for a big old bike tour across the U.S. But this wasn't his first tour, rather the 40th anniversary of that first tour. Today, he's going to share some insights about what has changed with bike touring, the gear, and I would guess probably himself. Hey, Jeff, welcome to Bike Life.
Hi, nice to be here with you, Jerry.
So I'm a kid from the 80s, and I am really looking forward to nerding out with you today and talking about all things 80s and bikes.
Sounds good.
So let's just get into it. Bike touring, as we all know, has really exploded a lot in recent years, and for sure since COVID. What was bike touring like back in, say, 1983?
Well, there were a lot of things that are very different, and some things that have never changed. When I was young, I was back in the actually right around 1980. I was a ski bum for a year out in Vail before I went back and went to college, and I met this guy who became a good friend of mine, and he had just completed a coast-to-coast bicycle tour, and I had never heard anything about that or knew that even existed, and I became enamored with the thought of doing a tour like that. So a few years later, when I was in college, I decided to just get on my bike and head off on a tour, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't go coast to coast, but I rode more miles than coast to coast. I did a big loop around the country, and I learned a lot along the way. So I bought a couple of panniers from Bike Nash Bar and put them on my bike.
I remember Nash Bar.
Yeah, I remember that. I strapped all my gear on. And I was going to school at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I left Knoxville and just headed west and really didn't know where I was going to go or where I was going to end up. And I had some of the maps of the Transamerica Trail, and I hoped to ride part of that trail, which I did, and just kind of learned and gained my experience along the way.
Wow. So paper maps, obviously, because offline GPS was not a thing.
No, paper maps. I remember I was about 3 or 4 weeks in my tour. I was riding through Missouri when I ran into my first bicycle tour, fellow bicycle tourist. And I remember he looked at me and he said, "What do you do when it rains?" And I thought, what do you mean? And then I looked at his bike where everything was wrapped in plastic and zipped up and tied. And I look at my bike; it looked like the Beverly Hillbillies, caravan. I hadn't even thought of that, like that it might rain on me while I was biking. And so he helped me learn how to pack my gear so it wouldn't get soaking wet, which was good because obviously I did run into some rain later on down the road. And it was little lessons like that I just kind of learned along the way. But the most interesting thing in getting started is just like I felt when I met my friend in Colorado who had done a bike tour and I didn't know anything about it. In those days, people, especially in the East, as I got farther into the Rockies, there were more cyclists. People just were flabbergasted by the fact that somebody was riding their bike with all this gear across the country. It was comical now when I look back on it, the reactions of people when they would see me. It was such an oddity that that you became kind of a tourist attraction no matter where you went, because people would come. I heard about you. Can I take a picture of you? Just things like that don't happen so much now, but it was really great back in those days.
Did anyone ask you like, why are you doing this? Don't you know that
Oh,
you could take a bus if you want to get somewhere? Like, why are
all
you
the
riding a
time,
bike?
all the time. Like it was all like poor guy. This the only way you have to travel.
Like, no, I'm
But
choosing this.
I'm sorry.
It's like, no, I'm choosing
Yeah, I'm
this
choosing
route.
this. This is something that I really want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your route? Take me through it loosely.
So when I rode west from Tennessee, and I rode up, and I got on the Trans-America Trail up in Missouri, and rode that trail through Kansas and through into Colorado, and in Pueblo I went north up through the Rockies, and then I rode all the way up through the Rockies until I came to Glacier National Park, and I crossed into Canada. And then I went back east, and I rode east across Canada over towards the Dakotas. And one of my goals is that I had heard about this ride in Iowa from people that I had met in Colorado, and they're like, you've got to go to the Ragbri. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what is that? And they said, it's this amazing ride of thousands of cyclists. And I got so intrigued that I actually planned my ride so that I could join the Ragbri in Western Iowa, and that was in 1983. And sure enough, I met up with thousands of other cyclists, and I rode the Ragbri as a unregistered rider, because I just joined along with all my panniers and everything else, and rode along with that group from western Iowa to eastern Iowa.
Yeah.
And then when I finished the ride, I just kind of meandered back through Indiana and down into Kentucky and back to Tennessee. I was gone about 9 weeks, and just rode back to my house. And so I did just rode through some amazing parts of the country, and made this giant loop and back home.
So I think it's hilarious that you jumped into Ragbri. So friends of mine call that doing a bandit race, where you kind of just, you didn't really register, but you're taking part of it. So very funny that you were one of the original early bandits of the 80s.
Yeah. Well, in those days, at least at that ride, they had these like orange plastic discs with a little chain on it. And I guess that showed that you were a rider. And on my first day, people started talking to me, and I told them I didn't even know this ride existed. I'm just happened to be here. And somebody said, here, take this and clip it to your bike and you'll be okay. And so
that got you into the food tents and everything else,
into
right?
the barbecues and the campgrounds, and what an amazing experience that was. So.
And then going up through and into Canada, obviously border crossings weren't a big thing. So there was no passport. It's just like, hey, just roll on through. Welcome. Right. Here's Canada. Welcome back to the US. No big deal.
Right. Yeah. Going up and going out. And I'd never been to Canada, so it was very exotic for me to ride across the farmlands of Alberta, and rode all the way over to Winnipeg, and then went south from there.
So after this big trip, what do you think you brought home with you?
Well, number one, it just really cultivated a love for travel.
Yeah.
And I absolutely had a fantastic time on the bike trip. I ended up doing 2 more shorter tours while I was in school, both of them with my sister, who became my bicycling travel buddy.
Oh, very cool.
She was 2 years after I had done that trip. She kept telling me, I wish I'd have gone with you. I wish I would have done it. And I said, well, we can do a trip as well. And so we ended up flying out to Seattle and then riding back to Tennessee, where she was going to school also. So we did that one summer, which was great to do with her together. And then a few years later, in 1987, we did a tour of all the New England states.
Oh, wow.
And that's right when she graduated from college. And then life took over. And we ended up, starting to work and got married and having kids and blah, 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 and mortgages. And, I did ride the Rockies a few times and stayed on the bike, not doing tours, but just riding for fitness, until a couple of years ago, when I thought, I've always wanted to do a coast to coast tour. and how appropriate that it's approaching the 40th anniversary of my first tour. And I have a little more flexibility in work right now, so I might be able to do it. And I just decided to put it on the calendar.
Okay. So was your goal then to sort of retrace your steps or just to blow out and do something completely different?
Yeah, I really didn't retrace my steps because my goal was to go coast to coast, and I wanted to ride through Colorado, which is one of my favorite states, and I wanted to ride through Tennessee, where I had grown up, which is one of my favorite states. So I sort of planned my route to go through those two states. And then because I wanted to avoid the heat, I left in September, a little bit later. So I had to be careful about, how far north I went. And I picked out a route from San Francisco up to the Lake Tahoe area, across Nevada and Utah into sort of southwest Colorado, and rode southwest Colorado across to Kansas, and then Kansas across Missouri, dropped down through a little bit of Kentucky to kind of middle Tennessee. And originally I was going to ride across the Smoky Mountains and go over to South Carolina. But this cold streak came in, and the temperature in the Smokies was dropping into the 20s. This was late October, early November. So instead, I went down through Chattanooga to Atlanta, and I finished up at Tybee Island near Savannah, Georgia, which was I'm glad I did that. I'd never been to that part of Georgia, and it was amazing. So it was great.
Okay. So didn't make it through Breckenridge though?
I didn't. I did not come through Breckenridge.
Okay.
Breckenridge is one of my favorite places, and in fact, I am a season pass ski holder, ski pass holder at Breckenridge.
Yeah.
So I do like Breckenridge a lot.
Okay. So how was this trip different besides the fact that your route was different? Like, I'm guessing maybe not the same bike?
No, well, not the same bike. I rode an old Fuji touring bike back in the 80s, which ended up being a great bike. But this time I was riding a Kona Sutra, with disc brakes and all the braze-ons and all the bells and whistles, and really a nice bike. But the difference is, and I've been thinking about this a lot on my tour and since then, about kind of what made the tour different. And when you just talk about in terms of equipment, the bike I rode the first time was comfortable, and so was this one. But what's different is the tires.
Okay.
Like
They're
in
wider,
the 80s,
right?
I had flat tires nonstop. And, hey, giving them a plug, Schwalbe Marathon touring tires, thumbs up, because I had two flats in the entire trip, and both of them were severe ones, like running over a roofing nail or something. It wasn't just a thorn or anything like that. It was so very, very few problems. But, of course, the biggest difference is technology.
Yeah.
Touring in the 80s was lonely, because in order to talk to anybody at home or for anybody to know where I was, I had to find a payphone. I had to make a collect call because, I didn't have a lot of money, and hope somebody would answer and accept the call, and then tell them where I was and talk. And I reread my journals from that trip before I did my latest one, and there was a lot of sort of pining, like missing everybody and missing my girlfriend and missing my family and just being lonely. And now with the ability to connect so many different ways, I really didn't have that issue at all. Of course, I had a GPS for navigation and a cell phone, which there aren't that many areas in the country where you're out of cell phone reach for that long. I mean, there were some places in Utah a day or two, and that was pretty wild. I carried a tablet. I wrote a blog every day. I uploaded it. I had an amazing number of people jumped on my journey and joined me. I have a restaurant, so I had a big map at the restaurant, and my staff would put pins in where I was every day. And so the customers could come in and see that. And that by the end of the tour, I had almost 2,000 people reading my blog every day to see where I was. So I felt, and they were writing me comments, and we were communicating. So communication and staying in touch just became so easy. And I was recording short videos for my family, no matter where I was, on my phone, and then texting it out to them. And I felt like I was so connected, which, in a way you think, well, you're trying to get away from it all. And I was, but it was awesome because, I have grown kids now and grandkids, and, friends and everybody wanted to sort of know that I was okay. And they did. It was great.
So every generation kind of has this backward looking thing like, oh, things were better in my day, in my generation.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like you're talking about these great upgrades with technology and GPS. Upgrade or downgrade? What do you think?
Well, I think as far as safety and convenience, definitely an upgrade. As far as having to be resourceful,
Yeah.
definitely a downgrade. I mean, back in the 80s when you toured, I mean, you were stopping at country stores and pulling out a map and saying, how should I go? You know, what's this road like? What's that road like? And, you had a lot more surprises along the way, a lot of them good,
Mhm.
sometimes not so good. So I think that, you could certainly spin that either way,
Yeah.
depending on how you look at it. I actually think it was a good thing, and I think it's a good thing that the technology's there. You know, when you're looking for a campground or need to find services or a bike shop, I mean, or you just at the click of a button you can find all this stuff. And I was on the adventure cycling maps
Yeah.
and using their resources. And Warmshowers, of course, was a big part of my trip. I had some great experiences with Warmshowers along the way. My only regret is I didn't have more of them.
Ah.
And I learned about Warmshowers from another friend of mine who has done a lot of bicycle touring, and I would read his blogs and say, "What is Warmshowers?" And I called him before the trip and talked to him about that, and I was able to stay at 3 hosts along the way, and those 3 nights were some of my most memorable and great experiences from my entire trip. And they each taught me something about being a Warmshowers host, which I am now, and prepared me for that as well. It was wonderful.
Well, do you have any kind of feel good stories from any of those experiences?
I do, it's my first night on the road I stayed with a Warmshowers host in Davis, California. I stayed with this couple, Kathy and John, who I called as I left San Francisco and started heading east. And these people were amazing. So they told me a couple things when I was looking to come to their place. First, they said, "Well, just so you know, we do have other guests staying at our house, so we won't be able to give you a bedroom, but we have like this spare office and we can put a bed in there." And I'm like, "Oh, that's fine." And the next thing they said, "And also we're hosting a dinner party that night, which is fine. You can just come to the dinner party." And I thought, wow, okay, that sounds great. And so I went and I met their friends and stayed. It was an amazing experience. And I learned, just because you got other things going on in your life doesn't mean you can't host a cyclist.
Yeah.
And the people, after I spent a couple hours with them, when the guests arrived for their party, they somehow thought that John and Kathy and I were old friends, because that's how we felt after only being together for an hour or two. And just a great experience. And I left just rejuvenated the next day, just really
Yeah.
excited even more so about my trip. And a few days later, I contacted Dan in Lake Tahoe as I was riding up there, and we made arrangements for me to stay with him. But I had severely underestimated the climb from Davis, California up to Lake Tahoe. That is some serious climbing, especially for a guy who just started his tour, and I was struggling. So it took me an extra day to get to Dan's place. And he was like, "Hey, no problem. Just get here when you get here. I've actually got to go pick up my wife at the airport that night, but you can just hang out at my house." And it just opened his home to me, and we met up. We went out and had dinner, and then he said, "I've got to take off. I'll be back late tonight. Just enjoy my home, and I'll see you in the morning." And I thought, man, that's amazing. That I thought, would I have done that for someone? Now I hope that I will. But it was just taught me that, cyclists have a trust that they share, and we had a great experience. And the next guy I stayed with was in Buhler, Kansas, with Garth, and that day I actually went farther than I thought I was going to go. I had a great tailwind, and I was speeding along in the town I was going to stay in. I decided to just keep going. And when I got to Buhler, I saw that there was a host, and I'm like, "Oh man, I feel bad calling a guy like at the last minute." But I thought, well, what's there to lose? And I called him, and he said, "I'm glad you called. My wife's out of town this weekend. Love to host you. Just sit tight. I'll be over to pick you up right now," because I was
Yeah.
in town. And we had an amazing experience. What an interesting guy, an amazing guy, a cyclist. And, it was just fun. And so each one of those experiences, just taught me how you can be a great host. And soon after I got back from my trip, I hosted a couple from Germany here in my home. And my goal was to...
Let me interrupt you. Do you remember what their names were?
Yeah, Lottie and Luca.
Okay, just curious because I had hosted a German couple who had traveled through the U.S. and I know it's a long shot. I thought maybe it's the same people because I know that
Well,
they were
these
going
guys,
similar routes.
Yeah, they had been cycling around the world.
Yeah,
they had been on the road for a year and a half, and it made me feel like a wimp after talking to them because they had gone everywhere. But great warm showers experiences. So that wasn't, of course, a thing back in the 80s. But I will tell you that I did meet people along the road back then that just invited me to stay at their home.
Yeah.
And one couple I remember was in Dallas City, Iowa, which right on the banks of the Mississippi. I was in a convenience store trying to figure out where I could camp in that town. And, the clerk was not, didn't really have any good information for me, but there was a lady there that was checking out, that was listening. And when I walked out of the store, she approached me and she said, "Did I hear you right that you've been riding your bike for almost 2 months around the country?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "You have got to come to my house to meet my husband. He is going to think this is the greatest thing ever." So I said, "Okay." And she just lived down the street, and we went in and talked. And her husband had recently retired. He was a railroad engineer. And we just clicked. And next thing I know, I was a guest of theirs in their home. And we stayed friends for over 20 years until they passed away. And actually, after I was married and had a young daughter, I went back and visited them at their home. And it was just incredible. It's that friendship that we made in those few moments.
And so think about those experiences that were facilitated, that were allowed because you were on a bike.
Oh, yeah.
Think about how it would have been different if you were in a car, a train, a bus, an airplane. Not just the places you've seen, but more so the people that you've met along the way.
Absolutely.
Because, we all know that we can get on a plane in Albuquerque and end up in Knoxville or whatever the airports are. But look at those stories that you miss along the way. And so traveling by bike just gives you the opportunity to make so many connections.
It's absolutely the best. And I made friends on this last trip that I'm still in contact with.
I love that. So I'm curious. What would your 61-year-old self say to your 21-year-old self about traveling, about touring?
Well, number one, when I was 21 years old, I was obsessed with how many miles I could ride in a day. And my 61-year-old self is like, hey, it's really not about the miles you put in. It's about the quality of the miles and experiencing things along the way. So I took things on a more relaxed pace. I didn't stress out if I didn't hit my goal for the day. I took time to smell the roses, if you will. And if I came to a cool place, and I forgot where I had heard this quote, but it's a great one. It's never pass up a good campsite. I took that to heart. So when I came across a beautiful place or a great place, I'm like, well, I was hoping to do a few more miles, but this place looks awesome. I'm going to stay here. So I would tell myself, it's not about the miles. Also in 1983, I didn't travel with a stove. I was eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Gas station food.
Yes. This time I made myself coffee and a good breakfast every morning. I took advantage of restaurants along the way. I made sure I had a hot meal at night. I took care of my nutrition a lot better. And electrolytes. They were not a thing back in the 80s. They're a thing now. They're awesome for quenching your thirst and for keeping your body hydrated. I can't say enough. Thank you to those companies.
When was Gatorade launched? It
wasn't around in 1983, or if it was, I didn't know about it because those days when you're on the road and you cannot quench your thirst. You're just drinking and drinking and drinking, and it just won't. This time I had scratch labs and liquid IVs and all, Gatorade, and I'm I'm sold. So I keep those in my bottle. So it was really, really nice. And to go along with that, ice.
Ah,
Back in the 80s, it wasn't easy to get ice unless you bought a bag of ice. These days, every gas station and every fast food place has those really beautiful ice dispensers.
yeah.
And you go in and you go, hey, do you mind if I get some ice? I'm on this bike tour. And they're like, no, fill up all your bottles. And I got spoiled. I was drinking cold drinks, most all the time. So I remember those days of lukewarm water in my bottle,
Ugh.
and having to choke it down. I was very spoiled on this trip.
Probably a lot of Snickers bars though then, and maybe even now.
Well, I'm a trail mix guy.
Okay.
So I would
Keeping
stop
it
and buy
healthy.
all my favorite stuff and mix these big bags of trail mix, and that fueled me a
Okay.
lot of it. And one of the best things about being on a bike tour is you can eat all the ice cream you want and still lose weight. So, I never passed an ice cream shop by that I didn't stop in either.
And I love the fact that you brought up ice cream because we talked about this offline. There's this quote that I love that I kind of live by. It's by Ben and Jerry's, the founder Ben Cohen, and he simply said, "If it's not fun, why do it?"
Hmm.
And so it kind of goes into this mentality of what I like to think of as type 1, type 2, and type 3
Hmm.
fun. So type 1 fun, as maybe some of us know, is that I'm having a good time now. Let's keep going. I would do this again. Type 2 fun is like, this is pretty awful. I can't wait for it to be over. But somehow a month, 2 months, 3 months later, you somehow look back with fond
Hmm.
recollection saying, hey, remember that time we did that thing? That was amazing. We should do that again. Type 3 fun is, I never want to do this ever again. So, as with any long bike tour like you did, you probably had various
Yes.
phases of type 1, type 2, and I don't know, maybe some type 3 fun. Did
Well,
you
I,
did
I I think type 2 and type 3 can sometimes blend together because
okay?
let me tell you, riding your bike across the Mississippi River is a harrowing experience.
Yeah.
That was the most frightening moment of the entire trip because the bridge, there's no shoulder except these big metal grates, and there's tons of traffic. And
Mm.
so when I got there, I probably stood there just looking at it for 20 minutes, like, how am I going to do this? And then finally, I just decided, I guess you just go and you wait for a gap and you just go. And then you hold up the traffic and everybody's mad at you, and you're riding as fast as you can, and you get to the end and the adrenaline surge through your body. You're just tingling all over, and you think, I could have died right then. And then later on, it's like, you wouldn't believe this experience I had on this bridge. It becomes a sort of a type 2, type 3 thing. Like maybe I'll
Right.
take the ferry across next time or something, but I made it. So it was great, you know?
Any other like dark times on either this trip or maybe like your first trip?
Well, and this is something I have to remember because I talked about how difficult the climb was going up
Yeah.
towards Lake Tahoe,
Yeah.
and it was my first few days on the trip, and so it was hot, and I was drinking a lot, and I wasn't eating, and I actually reached a point where I just almost fell off my bike,
Oof.
and I started getting woozy, and some people actually pulled over and said, "Hey, man, are you okay?" And I was only a few miles from my camping area, and they said, Let's put your bike in the truck and let's take you to your campsite because you don't seem like you're doing too good." And I realized I hadn't eaten all day, and I just bonked. So that was a lesson. Like, hey, you gotta take care of your nutrition, and I learned from that experience. But I was thinking, if the whole trip's like this, I don't know if I can make it.
Ah.
So I was got a little bit frightened, and then I recovered, and I did well. And the other experiences where I need to talk to the people who build roads in Utah because these 14% grades, like that shouldn't be allowed. Riding your bike up a 14% grade is awful. And there were some climbs where I had to push my bike up the hill. I could not physically ride my bike. And I thought, give me those 7% Colorado roads all day long, but no 14% grades. So
We've got a couple of those around here, but they're not that frequent. They're
yeah.
more of sort of like the off the beaten path roads.
Well, I know. And I got to Colorado. Everybody talked to me how tough Monarch Pass was going to be,
Yeah.
and it was the killer. And it was nothing, because after doing those 14% grades, it was like a 25-mile climb, but it was graded so nicely that I just went right up at my own pace, but no problems.
So were you still using paper maps, or were you using kind of like an offline GPS, Google Maps, or something on your phone for
Yeah, I was
navigation?
using at that point, I was using a combination of my GPS and Google Maps, and
Okay.
then and I still got local intel. There's nothing like local intel,
Yeah.
to talk to people about the rides, and especially when in Colorado, there's so many cyclists and resources. So I cobbled together. Once I took the Western Express route from San Francisco to pretty much to Pueblo. So I was on that, and I took some detours every now and then when people gave me a nice road to ride on or had some good ideas. But I used the Adventure Biking Association's maps,
Good.
and I had the GPS program from San Francisco to Pueblo. Once I got to Pueblo, there's not that many ways to ride across Kansas and Missouri, so I figured that out myself. And then I was kind of on my own through Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia, because there weren't really any maps, but I was able to figure it out easily, so it worked out well.
Do you have any new trips planned, or are you just going to kind of keep it local?
Well, I'm really hoping that next year I can do the Continental Divide Trail. From either Mexico to Canada or Canada to Mexico. I've become sort of enamored with that trail, and one, because it goes through some of my favorite parts of the country. I know it's a very challenging ride, but also there's or very little traffic on that ride, because you
True.
ride on mostly off-road. And if another thing I can contrast between traveling in the 80s and now, there's a lot of big cars on the road, RVs
Oof.
and big trucks, and even in the most remote, beautiful places, there's just a lot of traffic. And as you know, the roads still are not really designed for bicycle travel in most parts. They put those darn rumble strips right on the shoulder, so you can't really ride on it. And these RVs, which are everywhere, you see them coming in your mirror, and you're like, please don't hit me with your mirror. And although drivers were, for the most part, very courteous and gave me plenty of room, I thought, if I could do a tour and not have a lot of traffic and noise, I think that would be really fun. So I think my next tour will be a gravel or off-road type tour. Hopefully it will be the Continental Divide Trail. If not that, some other off-road trail. And that'll be next year.
Well, as you know, that route comes right through my front yard. Not quite literally, but darn near close to literally to my front yard. So I'll expect you to reach out to me for a warm shower stay, because we got you covered.
I definitely will.
I know the traffic is supposed to be very minimal. I've never done that route. The one thing you will have to worry about, as I'm told, is that there are bears up in Montana. So just be wary of that.
Yep. That's the part that scares me. Bears and water.
And water.
So, I won't have ice machines everywhere on the Continental Divide Trail.
Water filter. There'll be plenty of streams.
Yeah.
Until you start getting down towards like the southern part of Colorado and then into New Mexico, then things dry up a little bit, especially depending on the time of year that it's in.
And I think I'd like to hook up with some other cyclists to do that trip and not do it by myself, because you're in remote areas, and in case there are any malfunctions or health issues or whatever, it'd be nice to be with some other people. So
maybe
I'll cross that bridge.
Maybe a different bike too. I don't know.
Yeah. I definitely will do it on a adventure gravel bike. I'm actually training on the on Ryan Van Duzer's bike right now, the Priority adventure bike, which is a nice bike, and I'm having a lot of fun with that bike, just training right now.
Ryan's a good guy. He's a friend of mine from Boulder, so he's done a lot of really cool adventures.
I like his videos, so they're good. So
he is a sharp guy.
That's coming up. In the meantime, I'm riding for health and riding for fun and riding around Albuquerque, where I live in New Mexico, and enjoying myself and back to work, and life gets back to normal really quickly.
And thinking about Ben and Jerry's, if it's not fun, why do it, right?
And I did go to the Ben and Jerry's factory up in Vermont when I did my New England tour, and I ate a lot of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, so it was delicious.
And you probably earned every scoop on that journey.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, cool. I have so much enjoyed talking to you today, Jeff. And if there's anyone who's curious about what you're up to, how to connect with you, is there any way that they can find out what you're up to? Like maybe check out that map that you had posted?
Yeah, so I'll give you the information that links people to my my blog from the trip last year. It's got my contact information there. If anybody's coming through the Albuquerque area and needs a Warm Showers place to stay, I'm a host and would happy to host you. And any other resources I can give, I'd be more than happy to.
Awesome.
So,
And if you have the sort of the verbal of that blog, go ahead and give it to us, and we'll also put the actual link in our liner notes.
It's JJCTC 2023. Now I can't remember what it is.
Don't worry. We'll have a link for it.
I'm having one of those. So
yeah, it's okay. We'll link it in.
I have a website, and I'll give that to you. You can link it below. Sorry about that.
No, all good. I'm so glad I got a chance to talk to you. It sounds like you've been doing things right for a lot of years, and you're still going. So I love hearing stories like this.
Good. Thanks, Jerry. It was great to talk to you.
So thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to my conversation. If you enjoyed our show, give us a like, a share on your social channels, or maybe just tell your friends. These stories hopefully will inspire you to set off on your own bicycle journey and maybe make the world feel a little bit smaller, one pedal stroke at a time. My name is Jerry Kopak, and until next time, keep riding.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the show as much as we enjoyed making it. Wherever you are listening, please leave us a rating and a review, as it helps us reach more cyclists and hosts around the world. Visit us at Warmshowers.org to become a part of our community, or on Instagram at Warmshowers_org. If you would like to be a guest on the show or submit a question, please make sure to email us at podcast@warmshowers.org.